Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is a hodgepodge of intriguing gameplay concepts, bombastic nonsense, and off-kilter storytelling. It is a mess, but it's a delicious one, a joyous symphony of chaos that doesn't always make a lot of sense, but is consistently entertaining. It's certainly an improvement over the monstrosity which precedes it. Modern Warfare 3's campaign is about as much fun as having an RPG fired right up your ASS. It is absolutely rancid, a despicable, cynical 4-hour-long cash grab which feels like it goes on 3 hours too long. As someone who's dipped in and out of Call of Duty since the series' very first outing, I've long understood not to expect anything particularly avant-garde, but even by the series' somewhat formulaic standards, 2023's dose of military mayhem was an unprecedented lowlight. Ahead of developer Raven Software's newest release then, I didn't know what we were going to get. On the one hand, I genuinely enjoyed its extravagantly titled predecessor, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, also developed by Raven, its varied missions and conspiracy-coated story combining to great effect. It helps too that it features one of the all-time great Call of Duty levels in the form of the magnificent Break On Through.
The path split near a ruin, so he took the right fork, not the trail to the left.
On the other hand, based on Modern Warfare 3 being shat out in record time with nary a hint of guilt on Activision's part, I was also quietly prepared for another big budget bomb. Now that I've finally played through Black Ops 6 a few times, I'm happy to say that I think it is the series' most entertaining campaign in years. If you are not a Call of Duty fan, will it kickstart a love affair with the series? No. If you want to spend the vast majority of your time shooting bad guys and nothing else, will you be satisfied? Possibly not. If you're someone like me though, who enjoys the series' spectacle but also likes a bit of foreplay, that is, occasional breaks from the action or the introduction of unique mechanics which aren't comprised entirely of shoot man in face, then Black Ops 6 might just be the game for you. The campaign begins with Bishop Takes Rook, a routine maiden outing. You are CIA operative William Case Calderon, a faceless, voiceless protagonist who is sent to Kuwait in 1991 alongside colleagues Troy Marshall and Jane Harrow to extract Iraqi Minister of Defense Saeed Alawi. The burning oil field is a stunning setting, but it is not indicative of the game's Gulf War backdrop being used to its fullest throughout. Something I think Cold War does an outstanding job of is enveloping its events in an atmosphere thick with bleakness and distrust, matching the time period during which it takes place. The Gulf War, as you'll soon enough come to see, is mere window dressing in comparison. Some levels are set in the Middle East and Saddam Hussein is name-checked constantly, but that is as far as it goes. If you were expecting a slightly more introspective examination of America's role in the conflict, you will likely be disappointed. After securing Alawi, the game's antagonist is introduced. It is not one man nor one woman, but rather a rogue paramilitary group named Pantheon.
CIA? We had a deal!
Deal? Not with us. Where you headed?
Oh, how are you lying? Your man was getting me out!
Man!
Who exactly?
Is that us?
No, not Iraqi either.
Pantheon.
We need to leave. You won't stand a chance against them.
Aside from being introduced to the backpack, an excellent addition allowing you to carry lots of different equipment at once, and blowing up enemies with an RC car, everything which follows is quite straightforward and exactly what you'd expect this early on. You meet the heroes, you encounter the villain, you get used to the basic mechanics across a series of not too stressful skirmishes. Series veteran Russell Adler makes an appearance as well, a rogue agent on the run after being framed as a mole working for Black Ops 2 villain Raul Menendez. He doesn't do much for his case as he kills Alawi in cold blood before he's promptly captured by Case & Company.
You good?
Everyone all right?
Is this your...
No! Stand down!
Wait till Woods gets a load of this. Goddamn Russell Adler, CIA traitor. You've been on the run, what, 10 months?
And you then enjoy an explosive set piece which tasks you with shooting down an attack helicopter. Bishop Takes Rook is the video game equivalent of 3.6 Rontgen. Not great, not terrible, but there's no need to be concerned, as the game gets a lot more engaging from this point onwards thanks to Raven's willingness to experiment and play with established conventions. Back at Langley, CIA Deputy Director Daniel Livingston is a very unhappy chappie.
Okay then. Based on Harrow's reluctant report and the withholding of critical information regarding Russell Adler, Your team is suspended.
Are you for real?
This is bullshit.
As for you, Miss Harrow, consider yourself on very, very thin ice.
And so Case, Marshall, and Black Ops veteran Frank Woods decide to take matters into their own hands, heading to an abandoned safe house in Bulgaria to begin investigating Pantheon. Harrow stays behind to cover for the trio, Adler is locked up, and despite him seemingly being a very important character, Livingston is barely seen again until towards the campaign's conclusion. Your next stop is your new safe house, known as the Rook. You'll return to the Rook 7 times between missions, and in the spirit of mirroring the campaign's flow as much as possible, we will do the same. Since this video's only just got going, I don't want to slow down the pace too much right now, so for the time being, I'll give you but the briefest of overviews. The Rook is a huge house you can explore, within which you can do 3 things. You can solve a series of puzzles, chat to teammates about how they're doing and what's been going on, and spend money accumulated during missions upgrading Case's skills. There are also notes left lying around here and there written by different characters, with new ones appearing every so often too. Background lore which adds to the story is, of course, not to be sniffed at, but at the same time I wish it was made clearer when fresh documents appeared. It's entirely plausible that you search the house from top to bottom when you initially arrive and then incorrectly assume nothing much is going to change, leading to you missing optional exposition. But enough complaining, let's get back to the story. In my mind, Black Ops 6's plot can be separated into 2 halves of practically equal length. The first focuses on you getting a team together and figuring out what exactly Pantheon's master plan is, and the second is centered squarely on stopping them while also trying to get to the bottom of some strange goings on, a staple of this particular sub-series. Second level Blood Feud is all about building your squad, so without further ado, we'll dive right in. While Marshall heads to Munich to recruit a tech expert by the name of Felix Newman, Case travels to the fictional city of Avalon to help freelance assassin Savati Dumas, or Sev for short, dispatch the 4 leaders of criminal organisation the Guild. She has a bone to pick with the gang, her former employer, and if you join her in taking care of business, she'll hopefully join your team.
His name is Yannick, a broker for the Guild. He'll be on his yacht tonight taking a call with the Pantheon. We'll be listening in. Once that call is finished, you'll finish Yannick. That'll draw the target I really want. But first things first.
There is one phrase which strikes fear into the heart of anyone who suffered through Modern Warfare 3's campaign, and that is open combat. Open combat levels made up around half the entire experience, and they were generally pretty awful. You'd drop into huge areas recycled from the game's multiplayer and scavenge equipment while trying to avoid AI who would either go on full alert after sensing the tiniest movement, or were walking lobotomies and nothing in between, with there being little story apart from a few hurried radio messages. They were lazy and they were boring, with there only being one of note, High-Rise. High-Rise was the sole instance the idea looked like it might have potential as you crept through the building's narrow hallways, unlocking equipment which allowed you to skip entire portion of the mission during subsequent runs. Its cramped passageways and considered layout made it a tense affair and helped disguise any AI shortcomings, and it concluded with a dramatic rooftop set piece which ensured it still felt like a Call of Duty level.
Kill me. I won't help you. That's what they all say. Пошел ты нахуй. Пошли вы все нахуй, блядь.
I can see his mouth moving from here. Shut him up.
I even said at the time when chatting about Modern Warfare 3 that if open combat was to appear again, High-Rise needed to be the template used. Now, that's not exactly what has ended up happening. Instead of choosing to recycle High-Rise, or indeed any other open combat mission, Raven sensibly opts to use only parts of them across Black Ops 6's campaign, apart from on one occasion where they stick to the concept fairly closely. Blood Feud's first third, for example, has shades of High-Rise with its climbable scaffolding and slender hallways, as well as Modern Warfare 3's second best open combat affair, Gora Dam. The many waterways snaking through the facility made getting from A to B a relative breeze, and they return here to make life easier. You're dropped into the map with plenty of angles of attack, a silenced pistol and a single objective. Reach a nearby bell tower so you can assassinate one of your targets from afar, and the rest is up to you. It sounds daunting, but it's much less intimidating than it seems thanks to the area's design. If you've watched enough of my videos, you'll have likely heard me talk about certain games' levels being made up of 3 lanes. It's a style that has been used for nigh on 30 years due to how well it works, and if you've played a lot of Call of Duty's multiplayer, you'll undoubtedly be familiar familiar. To put it simply, it's a map consisting of paths to the left, right and centre, usually with spots along them which allow you to transition between them. The reason it works is because it offers enough complexity and choice but isn't difficult to remember. Left, right, centre, easy peasy. Blood Feud's first section is a small 3-lane map filled with equipment to make life easier, and even if you fail to use what you find effectively, you're given a generous amount of time to react before guards become fully alert. You start on its right and can continue on that way, sneaking through a pizzeria towards a side passage. You can cross over to the middle and try the main entrance, a risky strategy as you'll probably be forced into a firefight due to the amount of guards patrolling. You can also head left, zigzag between scaffolding and clamber up to the second floor. Then there are the waterways on both sides, providing extra cover as well. This 3-lane design is often used across the majority of Black Ops 6's levels, regardless of whether they're stealth or combat focused, and it makes getting to grips with its maps effortless. The best thing I can say about these early stages is that I reached the tower first try without being spotted once, which was a welcome success story after my numerous attempts at creeping through Modern Warfare 3's open combat abominations, which were all exhausting gauntlets of trial and error. Eventually, you reach the tower and take out your target.
So the Pantheon and the CIA are connected somehow. We got what we need. Take the shot.
Before a second set of guards tries to block your escape. Luckily, Sev arrives in the nick of time and ferries you to a restaurant where the 3 remaining guild members await. You are also given a brief moment to read a few files which expand on their backgrounds. You might expect it to be a precursor to them being an important part of the story, even if only for the remainder of Blood Feud, but you barely interact with them whatsoever. In fact, the only time you encounter them is in a single room during scripted scenes which last 45 seconds. In isolation you might think nothing of it, but it's an early warning sign of something Black Ops 6's campaign struggles with, following through in any capacity on many of the narrative threads it introduces. The guild leaders not being fleshed out is hardly the end of the world, but it is symptomatic of an issue which becomes a far greater problem later on. There are multiple ways to get inside the restaurant, and how do you think they're arranged on the map? If you said to the left, right and centre, you are correct, 10 internet points to you. The section itself being so similar to that which came before isn't ideal, it doesn't feel different enough to justify its presence, but what I will say is that its repetition, which is uncharacteristic across the campaign as a whole. A big reason why I enjoy it so much from a gameplay perspective is precisely because it tends to avoid doing the same thing ad nauseum, as is so often the case in other Call of Duty titles. Again, this segment isn't much different from the first, except you're far better equipped, although there is another thing of note, this safe. One can be found in every level, with the code to open them found by matching 2 waves on a radio, which is always nearby and easy to locate thanks to this visual indicator. The $1,000 in each and any other dosh you find can then be used at the Rook, more on that momentarily. Savati's disguise is enough to get you in front of the trio you've been hunting, and you kill all but one of them.
Well, look at that. You're a long way from home, Case. This man is extremely dangerous. Kill him immediately.
Aminado.
Blood Feud then finishes with a bread and butter Call of Duty duck and cover encounter with loads of enemies. Once they've been dealt with, you pump the final guild leader's car full of lead, and the job's a good un. And now we journey back to the Rook. Having unlocked the safe in the restaurant, you'll likely have some cash burning a hole in your pocket, which can be put to good use unlocking 3 upgrade stations. Each costs $500, but they're well worth the expenditure as they give you access to a massive range of different perks. The training area is focused predominantly on making you hardier on the battlefield, increasing your health or damage resistance. To the surprise of no one, the weapons bench is about guns, with power-ups reducing recoil, granting you extra ammo and similar available to purchase. The gear bench, meanwhile, is the place to go if you want more armour or fancy improving the lethality of your gadgets. The various upgrades and minor abilities aren't going to fundamentally alter the way you play Black Ops 6, but they're a nice way of continuing to build out the safe house idea introduced in Cold War. You also never have to venture too far to locate the safes hidden in each level, and so should be able to build up a healthy bankroll fairly quickly. You'll have to choose wisely to a degree at the start of the game, but towards its end you should have more than enough money to buy whatever tickles your pickle. As we'll see several times during the campaign with various mechanics, it's a way of providing a light dusting of decision making that never becomes involved enough that it risks detracting from all the excitement. With Savati Dumas and Felix Newman on board, the last piece of the puzzle is Adler. Tracking him down, it turns out, won't be much of an issue either, thanks to the Germans' technical wizardry.
Russell Adler is in your Washington, D.C. black site. The subterranean one that went into operation almost 3 years ago.
DC black site.
There are blueprints as well. It is located underneath Capitol Station. I assume you're aware of this.
It seems a trip to Washington DC is in order. While there are unfortunately no levels in the campaign I'd describe as all-time Call of Duty classics, think All Gillied Up in Call of Duty 4 or Vorkuta in the original Black Ops, missions which are still talked about to this day, there are a pair which come fairly close, and Most Wanted is one of them. To rescue Adler, you need to get into the Black Site, and an event in honour of Governor of Arkansas Bill Clinton being held at Capitol Station is the perfect cover. Your first objective is to find Monica Lewinsky, and I'm joking. Your first objective is to enter the event disguised as a photographer for the Washington Post, and then acquire a retinal scan of Senator Jack McKenna, which will unlock the Black Site's entrance. A camera capable of getting said scan is available from Most Wanted Start, and it also has the added benefit of tagging any enemies you train its focus on so you can keep abreast of their movements. There are 3 different ways of getting what you need, with each opportunity highlighted on your map. It reminds me of the newer Hitman titles to some degree, although as you'll see there's a lack of depth in comparison. During my first playthrough, I chose to go have a chinwag with the senator's wife, who pointed me in the direction of his secretary. The secretary and an accomplice, it turns out, were planning to blackmail McKenna, and so I stole their keys and then their evidence and used it as leverage with the senator's wife. I got my picture and the secretary was dragged away, her fate unknown.
I know how this looks, but I swear, I have nothing but respect for you and your husband.
My husband, God bless his soul, is an idiot, but he gets votes. That makes him a useful idiot. You, on the other hand...
Ah! What the hell?
Everybody's happy. Well, except the secretary, I suppose. If blackmail and illicit affairs sounds a tad too Jerry Springer, you can instead come to an agreement with mob boss Gabriel Amato. Amato needs to get his hands on some sensitive information the senator has hidden inside an object at a silent auction being held, and he wants you to figure out which item it is so you can steal the data within. You sneak into a restricted area, realise McKenna has bid on an antique clock, steal the disc inside it, and return to Amato. Shortly after, you meet the mobster in the back room of a pub and get your picture.
Here he is. Be quick. We need things to discuss when you're done here. There we go.
How are you?
Everybody's happy now.
Everybody's happy, well, except for Senator McKenna. Last but not least, you could immediately turn your attention to McKenna himself stealing a note from his coat. It reveals that he is working with Head of Security for Aldrain Energy, Lee Grisham, and so you next identify Grisham, follow him into a back room, and nick his pager. Newman translates the cryptic message on it, which leads to a diner's kitchen. You give the Senator and his guards what for, and get his retinal scan.
Boys, it's all yours. Go!
Everybody's happy, well, except for the guard who got shanked, the guard who got his face burned off, and McKenna, again. No matter which of the 3 you choose, CIA agents will also turn up halfway through and begin patrolling the main hall, a mild additional inconvenience. A term I'm going to try to avoid repeating ad infinitum during this video is "it's good by Call of Duty standards," but it's one which is often applicable. These choices don't carry much weight, there are 0 consequences beyond the immediate result, nor are they particularly deep in gameplay terms. Whichever of the 3 you choose will mostly involve a few conversations and some light sneaking, and if you decide to go rogue rather than follow the script, you'll quickly find yourself staring at a game over screen. If they were part of a role-playing game, they would be fairly underwhelming, as would also be the case if they they were transplanted into many other genres or series. By Call of Duty standards though, they're an entertaining enough distraction. As I alluded to towards the start of this video, if you're someone who's only interested in shooting things, this part of the campaign and others like it will probably be great. For those of you out there like me, who are weary of the series' same old, you might find they are the perfect side dish to accompany the healthy dollops of action regularly served up. Considering the espionage theme, they fit well within Black Ops 6. Adding texture, it's all the easier to appreciate when looking at how they fit into levels as a whole. It's not only about the variety these combat-focused sequences offer, but also how they inform pacing, and it's why Most Wanted is so captivating. The mission trots along quite slowly to begin with as you explore Capital Station and decide between the 3 different methods of obtaining Senator McKenna's retinal scan. It's a period spent breathing in the atmosphere. Once that's done and dusted, you sneak across the building's roof and narrowly avoid being captured thanks to Sev and Marshall. Now you're nicely warmed up, proceedings intensify as your stealth skills are truly put to the test inside the Black Site, which Pantheon has apparently also decided to break into, presumably to get to Adler. You slink through a large area while Marshall remains behind in a CCTV room to guide you.
I'm seeing 2 Pantheon in the room ahead.
Which brought back memories of sneaking through the tundra in the original Modern Warfare 2 while Soap provided Overwatch.
There's a truck coming, stay out of sight.
Combined with a splash of the fantastic stealth levels in the newer Modern Warfare games as well. Again, we also see Raven making use of 3-lane level design, with this segment's biggest room made up of a path to the left which takes you to a control room, one through the middle which is a no-go due to the number of guards patrolling, and a third to the right comprised of a break room and offices. After meeting back up with Marshall, you drive a drone through the next area and bust out Adler as the mission's grand finale kicks in. Shooting your way out of the Black Site is fun, although the reintroduction of armoured enemies is a shame. I get that there needs to be some enemy variety, especially in a series like Call of Duty which has been around for donkeys, but there is just something so dissatisfying about shooting your attacker in the head over and over again without them dying while a big red health bar ticks down. Whenever they appear, they do nothing but frustrate and provide a stark reminder that I'm playing a video game. In fairness, there are these RC driving fellas too, and aggressors like them with unique abilities beyond simply having a colossal health bar I think are a better fit for the series. Reaching the surface, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's all over, but you still have to fight through the main hall you were wandering around with not a care in the world not too long ago. Then you jump on a motorbike for a ridiculous but joyous chase sequence to conclude events.
You guys see the Great Escape?
Yeah, you didn't make it out.
We will. If we can't outgun them, we outrun them.
Most Wanted is a very long mission compared to most Call of Duty escapades, clocking in at close to an hour, but it never drags. It starts out slow and then builds and builds and builds, but in a manner you might not be accustomed to from the series. Often its levels are comprised of a little shooting, then a bit more shooting, then lots of shooting, sometimes with an ending set piece thrown in for good measure, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But with Most Wanted, there's also variety to match the pacing. Not only is there a smooth rise in intensity, there's a smooth rise in intensity while different gameplay scenarios are presented to you, and it makes for a brilliant experience. It's very rare that a Call of Duty mission makes me go, wow, but this was definitely one of those occasions. While Adler may be safe and sound, it's your team and not Pantheon who are blamed for the attack in Washington DC, with Marshall and Harrow concerned that the CIA may be compromised.
There's no way that they can know about the Black Site unless someone inside the CIA is feeding them intel, someone higher.
Is it Livingston?
Maybe.
And so the team lays low in the Rook while figuring out their next steps. It's time for some puzzle solving. There's a series of brain teasers waiting to be figured out at the safe house, with the reward for completing them the code to a safe. Most of them are identical to the 4 or so used interchangeably throughout the campaign, although there are several which only appear at the Rook. The piano puzzle comes first. Using a blacklight, you need to memorise a series of symbols on a room's walls which correspond to keys on the instrument. The right tune opens a door leading to a set of stairs and a sealed off bunker. To progress any further, you'll need to get the house's generator up and running by fiddling around with a few knobs and dials. There's also some optional Adler-centric exposition to listen to as well.
Daniel Livingston's been planning my retirement party for half a decade. He wants a youth movement inside the CIA.
Power restored, the bunker can be explored. Down one of its corridors is a note which mentions someone named D and something called N6. Sleeper agents are mentioned too. I am reasonably confident that the D is Nikita Dragovich, the original Black Ops antagonist, and N6 is Nova 6, the gas he planned to release using said sleeper agents, such as hero Alex Mason. Given that after using old fingerprint smudges to figure out a keypad code and matching letters to break a cipher, you gain access to what looks like brainwashing and training rooms, I cannot see what else the note could be referring to. The final puzzle is randomised, with you having to find numbers on objects in a room based on the items mentioned during a radio message.
Mother returned with the cereal and erased from the shopping list on a chalkboard. She realized her purse was still at the market as she reached for the broom to tidy up.
Returning to the safe and opening it up, you're then rewarded with 1,000 smackaroonies. Working through all the different challenges piece by piece was a nice distraction, but it also exposes shortcomings within the campaign itself. The piano, generator, and item number puzzles are interesting one-offs, but within missions you're faced with keypad smudges, letter matching ciphers, lockpicking, and the radio wave alignment repeatedly, and nothing else. I would have liked to have seen a few more entirely original problems to solve, as those in the Rook fit the Black Ops 6 espionage vibe to a T. There's no time to celebrate your newfound wealth either, with Adler revealing that Saddam Hussein and Pantheon have been conducting arms deals, including one involving an experimental weapon named the Cradle. That means a trip to Iraq and one of the dictator's palaces is on the agenda. The British SAS, however, are planning to bomb it, but agree to hold off if Case, Marshall and Adler first help them destroy 3 mobile Scud launchers. Joining them is Helen Park, making a welcome return after being part of your squad during Cold War.
Gladney's promised to help your team breach the palace if you destroy those Scuds. Help him out, and we'll see if he's a man of his word.
If levels like Blood Feud earlier and some later in the campaign borrow smaller bits and bobs from Modern Warfare 3's open combat missions, then Hunting Season attempts to do something meaningful with the concept as a whole. Describing the level and its 2023 predecessors in their simplest form, they sound very similar. You're dropped into a huge map and left to your own devices, with there being a number of objectives to complete in any order, however you please. That's where the comparisons end though. For one thing, the part of Iraq's Anbar province you explore is markedly larger and more varied than anything seen previously. There are sand dunes, enemy camps hidden amongst ruins, and even a tank graveyard. The locales are about as diverse as could be expected from the setting. Consequently, travelling by vehicle is practically mandatory, and fortunately there are a couple at your home base, which is conveniently positioned slap bang in the centre of the map. Cars and trucks can also take damage and will eventually break down, but there are plenty dotted around the map just in case. During my first playthrough, a big concern was that the added scale was going to result in wasted time fannying around moving between points of interest, but Raven is more than reasonable when it comes to the map's layout. You can fast travel between certain parts of the map, and you're never more than a 30-second or so drive away from something new. That gives another twist on the open combat formula time to shine. On this occasion, you have company, with Marshall, Adler and Park all joining you as you venture out. I think it's fair to say they are not the most astute companions. I rarely saw them do anything of note, and the time it takes for them to react to enemies is desperately slow, but they do still have their uses. The biggest is that they'll frequently natter away, commenting on your surroundings or events as they unfold, lending colour to proceedings that is especially appreciated during the quieter periods between objectives.
Someone forgot their boat.
I was wondering where I left that.
Probably been here for years.
With Case a mute and Hunting Season another hour-long adventure, you being alone with radio messages the only form of exposition, like in Modern Warfare 3, would be too scant an offering in story terms. Like those open combat missions of old, scavenging is still a thing too, but your starting circumstances are less punishing. There are plenty of weapons and some equipment available from the outset, littered around your home base, where in Modern Warfare 3 you began with nothing. Everything you procured would be added to your inventory for subsequent runs, but it was nevertheless an odd mechanic which didn't make much sense. Thankfully, there are still plenty of goodies to be found in the field too. You're equipped with this useful tac map chock full of markers to investigate. Destroying the Scud launchers is your primary objective, but taking care of at least a few optional objectives beforehand is advisable, as the rewards are well worth it. The 7 supply drops do exactly what they say on the tin. Crates usually surrounded by guards, they contain weapons, ammo, armour and the like. Scouts have been doing reconnaissance work, with one posted near each of the 3 Scud launchers. Talking to them will reveal enemy positions in the immediate vicinity. There are also a trio of surface-to-air missile, or SAM, sites. After laying waste to all of them, you can head back to base where SAS Captain Gladney will hand over the chopper gunner ability.
There you are. I've got something for you. Nice work on those SAM sites. We've pulled the tiger's tail now. Got the helo ready to go. Call it in when ready.
Which you put to good use straight away as a boatload of Iraqi soldiers converge on your location. It and other killstreak style pickups operate on cooldowns which are mercifully fairly speedy. 4 enemy encampments housing large contingents of baddies need to be dealt with too. Again, you'll find crates full of supplies, with the first also giving you the mortar strike ability, and each of them also contains 1 of 4 audio logs which together tell the story of a mysterious experiment.
Day 3. We moved the brothers from the same lab, and they're restrained but cooperative. But patient B, inhalation, is easier to work with. We upped his dosage and then noticed a viral The doctor! Get the doctor!
They might not make much sense at this stage, but hold tight, as they will soon. That list we just worked through covers almost everything optional on the map: supply drops, scouts, SAM sites and enemy encampments, except for one. I've deliberately saved the best side objective till last, rescuing the helicopter crew. Now, this is where we need to begin thinking about things from 2 different angles. If someone posed a question to me along the lines of, is the level an improvement over the open combat nonsense featured in Modern Warfare 3, my answer would be a resounding yes. Where for the most part Sledgehammer Games' efforts were drab filler content cobbled together by a studio short on time, Raven's take is far more robust. It's clear from minute 1 that hunting season is not a bodge job included as padding, but rather a new and hopefully exciting addition. From the map's varied locations and differing side objectives to the optional story beats you can uncover and your team's dialogue, it's an experience so vastly superior to those upon which it's based that they should hardly be compared at all. Looking at things from that perspective then, Raven seemingly hits a home run. At the same time, being much more enjoyable than something terrible does not by default justify the mission's inclusion, nor is it affirmation of its quality. Its content also has to be entertaining in its own right, and in my humble opinion, the majority of hunting season isn't hugely engaging. That is exactly why I've saved rescuing the helicopter crew until now, because that particular side objective is the exception that proves the rule. Arriving close to the wreckage of the helicopter, burning on the sand dunes, you first have to get rid of the enemy troops investigating. Once they've been eliminated, you're free to move in and assist the crew.
That's the last of them.
Soldier, where the hell? Doesn't matter. I need you to call an airstrike. Terminal's inside the helo. Go!
As you're surrounded by hostile armour backed by a steady stream of soldiers, you've no option but to take cover and rely on your newly acquired air support to thin the herd. It takes time to recharge as well, so you'll need to use your gun while waiting. What I love about this sequence is that while it appears within a non-linear level which unfolds across a vast space, it still feels somewhat curated, and that word curated is key. It's a set piece which wouldn't feel out of place in a regular Call of Duty mission, even if it's not the biggest or boldest ever seen. It stands in stark contrast to combat elsewhere on the map, which is bland. Proponents of hunting season will likely argue that the freedom afforded to you when tackling objectives is the unique selling point. You can snipe from afar, run in guns blazing, or go scorched earth using any unlocked abilities, or a combination of all 3. Thanks to you being able to carry a full range of equipment with you at all times, there's plenty of versatility in that regard too. The problem is that Call of Duty's mechanics and design aren't the best fit for this freeform structure. The AI is functional but fairly dumb, which the series' linearity normally helps conceal. There are different objectives, but they mostly boil down to killing lots of the aforementioned cannon fodder enemies. Areas are massive, but because you're not being funneled down a carefully constructed path, firefights lack bite. Driving around the map feels okay, but it can be janky, and I certainly wouldn't describe it in isolation as being fun. If Raven had filled the map with more mini set pieces like the helicopter crew rescue and less generic list-ticking busy work, then maybe I'd be singing the concept's praises a bit louder. In its present guise, it's telling that the most compelling part of hunting season is that which feels most traditional. I've not talked about destroying the 3 Scud launchers, your primary objective, yet either, but they also serve to illustrate my point. One of them I decided to clear out using my attack chopper, raining down death from above so that I could saunter up to it, C4 in hand, after killing any stragglers. That was fine enough, but I'd be lying if I said doing the same during next mission the Cradle wasn't a lot more fun, as I circled Saddam Hussein's palace, turning guards into red mist, while my allies continued their ground attack below. I took a less nuanced approach for the second launcher, charging headfirst towards the hillside ruins housing it. The ensuing firefight was somewhat engaging, but shooting my way across the outside of a sprawling Kuwaiti airport during later level ground control did a much better job of keeping me on the edge of my seat during a large-scale encounter. The third and final Scud I destroyed from a distance using a remote-controlled explosive RC car. I enjoyed doing so, however the sequence in Most Wanted where you do similar in the Black Site while also trying to avoid being spotted by Pantheon soldiers was undoubtedly a more mechanically complex affair. My point is, hunting season's open structure gives you plenty of freedom to choose your approach, but much of what you can do is executed in far more engrossing fashion elsewhere in Black Ops 6, and indeed in other decidedly linear Call of Duty campaigns. With that being the case, it's hard not to think of it, and by extension all other open combat missions in general, as an experiment that ultimately hasn't paid off. Raven comes close to making it work, and I'm glad I got to experience the idea in its optimal form, but honestly, I'm hoping it's something the series moves on from for at least the foreseeable future. With the Scud launchers no longer a threat, the campaign rolls straight into the Cradle, part 2 of the gang's Iraq excursion.
Look alive, people, they know we're coming. Fire at will.
You're looking for the entrance to a bunker on the far side of the palace, but you'll have to put up a good fight to reach it as opposition is fierce. Thankfully, your hard work during hunting season is rewarded, with everything you collected from equipment to kill streaks available right from the off. I chose to jump in the chopper gunner almost immediately, which allowed me to make short work of the pesky snipers taking pot shots from above. Connecting the 2 levels in this manner is a stroke of genius, and it's another example of what I mean when I say the campaign genuinely toys with your expectations. As I approached the gates, my assumption was that the next 15 minutes would be a bog standard Call of Duty blast 'em up, but as they so often do, Raven throws in a little something extra which sets the mission apart. In fairness, take away that twist and at its core it is still a big, brash, extended firefight, but I think at this stage of the campaign its inclusion is more than justified. Remember, this is Black Ops 6's 5th level and it's the only one so far to be solely combat focused, other than Bishop takes Rook at the start, which doesn't really count as it's over quicker than you can say, I don't like sand, it's coarse and rough and irritating and it gets everywhere. This will be the last time I mention it, promise, but again, it's worth taking note of the palace's 3-lane design too. You can attack using paths running down its left and right sides, or you can sprint down the middle and inside if you're feeling particularly ballsy. I only bring it up again as we've so far seen it used mostly across stealth sections, but here it's used during combat. As I said earlier, it's on display absolutely everywhere, and now I feel I've highlighted it enough, I'll shut up about it. Reaching the bunker, Case and company make a shocking discovery, and I'm not talking about Saddam Hussein's gold-plated toilet. No, what they uncover is far more sinister.
What do we got?
The Cradle.
Pantheon has a goddamn biological weapon. And they put this in Saddam's hands too?
A sample of it, based on what I'm seeing in here.
What'd you find?
A disc. Some notes, all in Russian. The project's headed by Matvey Gusev.
Sounds like you know him.
I recognize the name. Gusev was a scientist in the Soviet Union's biological weapons program, Biopreparat.
They also find a disk which Newman will hopefully be able to decrypt. Heading back outside, you need to reach the palace's roof for extraction. Much like the Cradle's first half, this second isn't overly spectacular. You mostly just run around shooting dudes while blowing up the occasional helicopter, and so I want to quickly touch on the game's score. I never normally pay a huge amount of attention to Call of Duty soundtracks, but I always listen intently when it comes to the Black Ops games, as since the second entry, Jack Wall has been responsible for their music. For those of you who haven't heard of Jack Wall, he's perhaps most famous for his contribution to BioWare's Mass Effect trilogy, and believe me when I say it is truly stellar work. In fact, one of my all-time favourite video game ditties was his creation, the track Vigil, which appears throughout the sci-fi series. I was therefore not surprised in the slightest when I frequently found myself nodding along to the campaign's various tracks, like the Palace you're hearing now which plays during the Cradle, such are their calibre throughout. Where Cold War's OST struck a subtler chord, flawlessly encapsulating the atmosphere of distrust that period engendered, Black Ops 6's is louder, prouder and rock-oriented, which pairs perfectly with the Gulf War era. On balance, I'd say Cold War's is probably the more memorable of the two. Tracks like Bell's theme give it a wonderfully disconcerting quality, but this latest effort much better complements the many gunfights you indulge in. With the music being so blooming catchy, you might be hoping the rooftop skirmish goes on forever, but all good things must come to an end. Hopping on an arriving helicopter, Case's time in Iraq concludes with a fireworks display.
Confirmed. Incoming.
Enjoy the view.
After a lovely holiday, the team returns to the Rook as what I'd describe as the first half of the story draws to a close. We have our team, we know who the enemy is, and we've got at least some idea of what they're planning, something involving a biological weapon named the Cradle. Hold on to your hats though, as it's going to get considerably more bewildering from this point onwards. With so much happening, I also don't want to slow things down, so we'll move on at pace to Black Ops 6's next level, Emergence. While Adler stays behind to search for Matvey Gusev, Pantheon's lead scientist, Case, Marshall and Savati journey to the abandoned Advanced Technologies and Applications facility in Kentucky, where the Cradle apparently originated. Emergence does not start well for Case as he plummets down a lift shaft and inhales some sort of gas, which immediately begins to have a profound effect on him. As you prise an axe from a mannequin, it's made clear that this is not going to be your ordinary Call of Duty level. Mannequins have been a horror gaming staple in recent years, but the title I immediately thought of as everything began to take a dark turn was the Xbox 360's Condemned Criminal Origins, or more specifically, your trip through Bart's department store. Oh, and in addition to your wooden chums, there are shed loads of zombies to contend with too. There are a huge number of references to horror games and films littered across Emergence. The soundtrack, that playing in the background right now, for example, sounds a lot like Ennio Morricone's outstanding theme to film The Thing. Raven may have also drawn inspiration from any number of immersive sims when it comes to the facility's aesthetic, with its look reminiscent of those found in titles like Prey, Bioshock and even Atomic Heart. Or perhaps Remedy Entertainment's brilliant Control was a point of reference, what with the ringing phones and the directors who serve as bosses of each area. The carpets are also a near-perfect match to those featured in Stanley Kubrick's horror masterpiece The Shining, and commentary is regularly provided by a mysterious female voice in Case's head.
Don't worry, the Cradle can't hurt us anymore. We're special. Special since we first experienced the Cradle. 10 years ago.
Which immediately made me think of Dishonored and the heart Corvo Attano carries with him. There are shades of Doom as well, with you battling monstrous beasts against a heavy metal backing track. I'm sure there are plenty of others I've missed as well. Your goal during Emergence isn't a complicated one. In the main hall there is an elevator which could be used to reunite you with Marshall and Sev, but you won't be able to get it running until you find a set of director keycards. There are 4 locations, each containing one of them: Advanced Combat Research, Administration, Cognitive Research and Joint Projects. They may all have been abandoned long ago, but that doesn't mean your task will be an easy one either, as there really is an extraordinary number of zombies to deal with. When they first started appearing, I was intrigued. Ultimately though, their estranging conclusion which doesn't pay off. To understand why Emergence in my view fails as the designated weird mission in Black Ops 6's campaign, it's best we look at one that does its job to perfection, Cold War's Break On Through. Oh, and if you haven't played it yet, I'd go try it as soon as possible rather than have it spoiled here, as it's terrific. Break On Through is a masterclass in building tension while fostering feelings of unease. As protagonist Bell treks through the Vietnamese jungle several times in quick succession, Adler narrates his past experiences there.
The path split near a ruin, so he took the right fork, not the trail to the left.
But you can also choose to ignore him or do the unexpected whenever you please.
The zip line nearby was the best way back. He wanted to get to that bunker as soon as possible. Sure, Bell, you committed suicide. Then what happened?
Depending on how disobedient or compliant you decide to be, your path through the level will change, with events continuing to get stranger and stranger the further you progress. You might even stumble upon the odd zombie, if you're lucky. Break On Through works so well because it's a superb marriage of story and gameplay. Due to being brainwashed, Bell is unaware that he was once the right-hand man of Perseus, the game's villain, and that the Vietnam scenario is a fictional one, which Adler is trying to leverage to coax Bell into revealing the whereabouts of his former boss. For all intents and purposes then, when you ignore Adler's orders, you are fighting against his brainwashing, with Bell's resistance or lack thereof also reflected in the environment. Aside from the zombies, which should be considered only a well-hidden Easter egg, the mission you play through and the story which unfolds are intimately connected. Where Break On Through is clever, Emergence is crass. Perhaps I'm missing something, but I personally struggle to see how fighting hordes of undead and a series of one-off boss monsters connects to Black Ops 6's story in any meaningful way. Raven wrote a big narrative reveal, more on that soon, and crafted a captivating setting, but where there was an opportunity to capitalise on both, to come up with something just as special as Break On Through, they instead settled on the odd premise of man breathes in toxic gas and sees lots of ghouls for some reason. It feels less like an idea designed to intelligently amplify Emergence's story beats and setting, and more like a poorly masked advert for the game's separate zombie mode. Even with that being the case, I'd be remiss not to mention some of the highlights as you hunt for the 4 keycards. Advanced combat research is your first port of call, and it is fine. You get a grappling hook and fight a bullet sponge dog demon director in a large area you can zip across at speed thanks to your new gadget. It should be noted that you can then visit the next 3 areas in any order, but I'm going to stick to how I experience them. Administration followed, and it is the best of the bunch. As you collect a set of folders required to progress, the many mannequins lying around will begin creeping up on you when you're not looking. Their animations only just finishing as you turn to face them so you still get glimpses of them moving is genuinely creepy. You then also chase a special red mannequin, which promptly turns into another hulking beast you have to dispatch. After gathering 2 keycards, I think Raven should have looked to wrap things up here, as Emergence has been going for 20 to 30 minutes by this point, which is more than enough. But no, there are still 2 more areas to go, and you'll have been playing for close to an hour by the time you reach its conclusion. Cognitive research was my next stop. You drain a cognitive research pool, I'm not even going to attempt to fathom what that is, and then fight another boss who is accompanied by plenty of zombie backup. Finally, I headed to joint projects. There was a fun sequence where lots of zombies who looked like woods sprinted down a corridor at me, which happens once or twice elsewhere in the facility too, but with different characters, although it's ripped directly from Cold War, so 0 points for originality. A couple of references during this part I also liked. The monster itself, a mimic which behaves like a typhon from sci-fi immersive sim Prey, as well as the music, which you might recognise as the track 115, which played during the Kino de Toten Zombies map in the original Black Ops. I'd play it for you now, but as it's by a named artist, I'm concerned about the copyright implications. Finishing all 4 of these scenarios is incredibly arduous. They go on and on, with the combat they contain being uninspiring at best and extremely monotonous at worst. While they provide a range of challenges, none of them are really very good, save perhaps your brush with the mannequins in administration, which still manages to outstay its welcome. What's even worse is that once you've collected all 4 keycards and ridden the elevator back towards the surface, there's yet another gaggle of nasties waiting to ruin your day. It's a never-ending procession of mediocre encounters which mostly ask little of you other than to shoot whatever fiend appears 200 times. As mentioned, there are big story implications at least. We learn that Pantheon was originally a division of the CIA and the Cradle's creators, developing the gas as a drug designed to produce a new generation of performance-enhanced operatives. Case, it turns out, was one of those test subjects, and while early signs were promising, it didn't all go to plan.
The Cradle project failed us, Case. We were out of control, violent, maniacal, and in our rage we sabotaged this facility. Contaminated with the same poison that runs in our veins. Remember?
Due to that incident and the violent tendencies others also displayed, CIA Deputy Director Livingston, remember him, shut the program down, dissolved Pantheon, and had Case rehabilitated. I'm going to be careful about how much I discuss Black Ops 6's story, as I don't want to reveal too much yet, but there are a few things I want to touch on, or complain about, as it begins to pick up. Number 1. As much as I enjoyed building a team, discovering the Cradle, and finding out Case's backstory, we're more than halfway through the campaign without that much actually happening. To paraphrase J.R.R. Tolkien, it's like butter that has been scraped over too much bread. Emergence is packed full of revelations, sure, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to claim that everything prior could have unfolded across 2 or 3 missions max, rather than 5. The twists and turns come thick and fast from now on, and it makes the plot as a whole feel quite disjointed. Number 2. A lot of threads have and will be introduced, many of which don't get the attention they deserve, which is a particularly glaring issue given my first point. Case being the test subject for a top secret drug you'd think would be something brought up continually, but it's barely mentioned again until the end of the game. Early on especially, there are hints that Marshall and Harrow have a history, but it's never really expanded upon.
Are you admiring your own work?
Can't believe you kept him.
Not all reminders need to be scars.
Why are we here, Harrow?
It becomes apparent Adler worked at the facility which developed the Cradle, but that never comes up again either.
Adler thinks that's where the Cradle may have come from. We need some answers on what this thing does.
Didn't you say Adler worked there at some point?
Briefly, about 10 years ago. He mentioned unusual, classified programs they are using human subjects.
Also, who is the voice in Case's head? Just as quickly as she's introduced, she disappears, and as far as I can tell, an answer is never forthcoming. There are plenty more examples I've not listed too. Where Raven packing Black Ops 6 with a wide array of gameplay styles works, the same approach is taken when it comes to story, with everything in the kitchen sink thrown in, and I can't help but feel that some of the fat needed trimming. Instead of focusing on loads of plot threads, many of which lack depth, there should have been fewer which were covered in more detail. Number 3. Where I didn't ever worry about Bell not having a voice in Cold War, Case being a mute in Black Ops 6 really sticks out to me. As to why his silence is so much more noticeable, I'm honestly not sure, but it gets harder and harder to ignore the further the game progresses. There are some fairly big surprises in terms of his history and the story in general, and Case never vocalising his thoughts or feelings reduces the weight I think many of them would otherwise have. Okay, let's now get back on track. After being reunited, Case, Marshall and Sev discover that somebody has already stolen a large batch of the Cradle, we assume Pantheon, and the trio then returns to the Rook. While you've been away, Newman has been busy decoding the disk found in Iraq. Its contents, tests involving the Cradle, are shocking enough, but they are nothing compared to the revelation which follows.
Is it faster this time?
Faster, yes. And more aggressive, as requested.
Wonderful.
I have not been complimentary of Black Ops 6's overarching narrative over the last few minutes particularly, but there is part of it I want to heap praise on. There is a running theme across Case, Marshall, Woods, Sev, Newman and even Harrow's stories. Each is trying to adapt to a new way of life. Despite him being the main character, Case's is the most obvious and least interesting. He was once experimented on and is trying to live life while suffering from the repercussions. It's not deep. At the start of the game, Marshall is the model CIA operative, but due to his newfound distrust of the agency and the agency's distrust of him, he's found himself on the outside, so to speak. Woods was once a soldier willing to do anything to get the job done, but by the time Black Ops 6 rolls around, he's confined to a wheelchair and is struggling to cope with his perceived uselessness. Both Sev and Newman are trying to come to terms with their past deeds and live better lives. Sev killed her partner under false pretenses, as well as many others, during her time with the Guild, while Newman worked for the Stasi, a partnership he eventually came to regret. As for Harrow, well, we now know she's a double agent whose real loyalties lie with Pantheon, that much is apparent, but the reasons as to why won't truly become clear for a while yet. Regularly revisiting the Rook to learn more and more about each character was something I always look forward to the extent it served to take the edge off the harebrained story of Case & Company trying to thwart Pantheon and later Harrow. Even by the Black Ops sub-series standards, it's quite the wacky tale, and interacting with the team away from all the silliness grounded things somewhat. Not a huge amount, but somewhat. It helps too that in a game with middle-of-the-road graphics, the fantastic facial animations of those who reside in the safe house go a long way towards selling their stories. That's not so much the case with the unnamed NPCs milling around during next level High Rollers, however. Thanks to Newman intercepting a radio message, the group has a new target, a casino in Avalon which has been wiring money to Gusev. If the gang can get hold of its financial records, perhaps they'll lead directly to the Pantheon scientist. If you are a fan of a certain fictional English super spy, High Roller's introduction is bound to put a smile on your face.
It's dangerous, and it's gonna take all 5 of us to pull it off. Starting with me at the high roller table. Winning big there sets our whole plan into motion.
We'll be ready.
I know you will. Let's find out what the Pantheon's hiding in that casino.
Using imagery and music reminiscent of a James Bond title sequence, the level which follows features a setting fit for 007 too, in the form of Casino Lutazi. High Rollers also takes its cues from heist films. You've spent the entirety of Black Ops 6 so far in Case's shoes alone, but for this next mission you'll be jumping between him, Marshall, Newman and Sev. Proceedings even begin with you playing as Marshall. As opulent as it may be, the casino floor is a gilded cage. There are 3 sections in the campaign which let you wander around a semi-open area of your own accord. Earlier on, Most Wanted opened with Bill Clinton's Washington DC shindig, and in a couple of levels' time there's Under the Radar's early stages. While neither are exactly brimming with choice and consequence, both have an element of dynamism to them. Most Wanted has multiple objectives to decide between, guards patrolling and the odd change of circumstance. Under the Radar, as we'll get to shortly, is the most involved of them all. Casino Lutazi has nothing of note. There are plenty of NPCs standing around or transfixed by the various games, but they're all glued to their spots, never moving an inch. You can listen to many conversations between them, an impressive amount in fact, but because their facial animations in particular are a far cry from the quality of the main casts, they mostly look very wooden.
Is your brother still with that little plaything of his?
She left him. Finally.
Oh, really? Maybe I should try my luck.
Are you kidding? This just happened a week ago.
In terms of objectives, there's nothing asked of you either. You walk over to a sign where Sev hands you some playing cards to help you cheat your way into the high roller bar, then you wander over to a table, and that's your lot. The action then switches to Case, who attacks from below using the casino's canals. Your goal here is to tap into 3 separate junction boxes so that Woods has an unimpeded view of what's going on through the building's security cameras. It builds on the opening section of Blood Feud way back at the start of the campaign, with its waterways allowing speedy movement across the area and the many boxes stacked everywhere providing cover when using solid ground. It's a natural progression which doesn't set the world alight, but offers an increased challenge courtesy of the larger number of guards and increased sightlines. Once Case has done what's needed, he gets himself caught on purpose, and with Woods now able to facilitate a little cheating, we return to Marshall. You've not got much agency, nor is much asked of you beyond selecting the winning hand, while Sev provides a distraction.
What are you doing?
I'm terribly sorry.
You're making it worse. Leave me alone, huh?
Oh, man. You need a minute?
No. Just go away. Continue the game.
All in. Gentlemen, showdown please. Full house.
What?
7's full of jacks. Signor Marshall wins.
How did this happen?
2 of the 3 options are full house and 4 of a kind, resulting you winning, while the third, high card, is a loss. I was hoping events would change in some way if I deliberately picked poorly, but all I was met with was a mission failed screen before I was taken back to just before the decision. It's a reminder that you remain in a gilded cage. Entering the high roller bar, you plant a device and create a commotion which lasts just long enough that you're able to steal a keycard for Newman.
Like I told you, the problem isn't the machines. I'll need to reset the cell.
Do it.
Hey man, this lady needs a bucket to carry those winnings.
Senor, I'm sorry.
Or maybe some of those canvas bags with some big dollar signs on them.
Please understand.
And I love everything about the smooth transitions between characters which happen often from this point onwards. The music, the framing, they really help add a sense of playfulness to events. It absolutely feels like Call of Duty's take on Ocean's 11 and the like. It isn't the first time the series has done something like it. 2021's Vanguard, for example, switches between characters during its last level, but High Roller's premise, for me, makes it feel unique in the best way possible. I'm not sure I've ever said this about a Call of Duty developer before, but you really get the sense Raven had a lot of fun putting it all together. As Newman, you sneak through a restricted area to a server room where you upgrade the keycard so it grants armory and elevator access. It's not a difficult section thanks to the wealth of cover and vents you can crawl through, but its final parts will vary somewhat. Once the job's done, an alarm sounds, putting nearby enemies on high alert unless you've already dealt with them. Back upstairs, it's finally Sev's time to shine. You head to the vault area and quietly dispatch a few henchmen, ready the elevator for Marshall and Newman, then gather enough weapons to take down a small army, or a small contingent of casino security guards. With the safe blown, you then put all those guns and explosives to good use too. To begin, you blast away at what seems like an endless parade of goons, using a trolley rigged with explosives to cause further carnage. Then you return to Case to conclude the mission, picking the lock on his handcuffs and sprinting to the vault before battling to the exit. While that's going on, a few words regarding High Roller's structure. It's no coincidence, I think, that it and Most Wanted are Black Ops 6's best missions, as they share the pacing and variety I spoke about earlier. During both, you explore a large, relatively safe environment full of NPCs as events progress fairly slowly, indulge in some stealth as the tension rises, then get stuck into a whopping great climactic firefight which serves as a crescendo. Even those big encounters sort of mirror each other. In Most Wanted, you shoot your way back through Capital Station's main hall, which you already strolled around earlier, while in High Rollers you return to the casino floor for a skirmish or two. There is nothing wrong in the slightest with the matching, I just thought the similarities were interesting. Escaping by boat, the level draws to a close, with the scenes backed by the most James Bond-esque music I think I've ever heard. Seriously, it sounds like it's been taken directly from one of his adventures.
Nice job, everyone. Now, find out what's in that dossier.
And now we're back at the Rook for the second to last time. Unfortunately, while the casino's financial records did result in a lead Adler followed, Gusev was able to flee. It's not all bad news, however.
Goose is heading to the Kuwaiti airport as we speak.
Oh, that airport's in a war zone. Even if we head your way soon, can we reach it?
I have a SATCOM connection in the area. Might be willing to help us.
Might.
Since there's a lot going on during your final visit, a few words now about the safe house before things go bananas. In short, it's great. Between the optional dialogue, puzzles, upgrades and occasional new notes, there's definitely enough there to justify its repeated presence. Do I want to see it in every Call of Duty? No, that would be way too much of a relatively good thing, but as part of Black Ops, I absolutely think it should return in the future. Raven didn't come up with the idea, something like it was first used in Black Ops 3. However, they very much made it their own, iterating on the concept twice across Cold War and then Black Ops 6. I'm very intrigued by how they might build on it next, and hope for more character interactions and puzzling in particular, as they both really stood out to me. Of course, if you're only interested in the traditional Call of Duty fare, you can skip right past it all, but for me, the game will be a weaker one if you do so. The team's best shot at figuring out what Harrow and Pantheon are up to is Gusev, and there's little time to waste. The scientist plans to flee Kuwait, so there's only a limited window before he's out of reach, which means the gang needs all the help they can get. Luckily for them, another Cold War alumni is able to lend assistance, with Lawrence Sims joining the gang for one last favour.
So can you get us to Gusev? I can get you close. But Doc, this is it for me.
I'm on a different path now. Once you get what you need, I'm out.
It's the second time I've heard that this week.
Ground control is similar to the Cradle earlier, it's all running and gunning and not much nuance, which makes this a good time to talk about Black Ops 6's shooting. I know, it's quite late in the day to be talking about what is a core component of the experience as a whole, but there's been so much else going on that there hasn't been much time to squeeze it in. The other reason why I've decided not to touch on it until now is because I've honestly not got that much to say. Beyond your near bottomless backpack full of deadly equipment you can rummage through at a moment's notice, gunplay is much the same as other Call of Duties released in recent years. If you're familiar with the 3 Modern Warfares or Cold War, there's not much that you won't have seen before when it comes to actually blasting things. Shooting is tight, the controls are generally responsive, and enemies behave pretty much exactly how they do in every other game. That is, they offer themselves up with reckless abandon, although I did notice a slight improvement over older Call of Duty titles. AI is short for artificial intelligence, but here I'd say almost intelligent is more suitable, as your aggressors do sometimes exhibit some degree of tactical thought more obviously than in the past, pushing forward, falling back, and sometimes repositioning. They're still stupid enough that it's amazing they're able to operate a firearm at all, but occasionally there's teensy glimpses of something more. The different difficulties feel well balanced too. I chose to use a controller for my first playthrough, and as I'm atrocious at aiming with analog sticks, I worked my way through on normal. It was a decent enough challenge, although I never broke into a huge sweat, which is exactly what you want. Despite every cell in my body telling me not to, I also tried my favourite missions on Veteran too, as that is where any glaring issues would really obviously rear their ugly heads. I used a keyboard and mouse for them because otherwise I'd have had about as much chance of succeeding as a dog trained to tap buttons at random. Surprisingly, I enjoyed myself. Certain sections were fairly tricky, but even the toughest required few attempts. Granted, to some of you out there who are gluttons for punishment, that might not sound appealing, but I think it's mostly due to a lot of the downright unfair aspects of the franchise's veteran difficulty having been gradually toned down over a number of years. There's significantly less of the absurd grenade spam once so prevalent, for example, and generally you're given a smidgen more time to react should you find yourself in a bit of a muddle. Veteran is a fun challenge that veers into frustrating territory a lot less frequently than you would perhaps expect, and that is ultimately a good thing. Much of Black Ops 6's gameplay is quite ordinary then, and if I was particularly grumpy, I might even go so far as to say it feels like the series is stagnating in that regard. But there are 2 notable highlights which help elevate it somewhat. The first is Omni Movement. Omni Movement allows you to sprint, slide and dive in any direction and chain them together. Imagine a military muscle man version of Max Payne and you're most of the way there. As with every Call of Duty, I gave the multiplayer a go and found it to be a nightmarish experience, as soldiers controlled by kids with more time and talent than I'll likely ever possess use the Omni Movement system to their advantage, twerking their way across the battlefield in the blink of an eye. From a single player perspective, I used it every now and then when I remembered it existed, but it's another inclusion I don't think the game is really set up to properly cater for. Often I wanted to dive forwards or slide from side to side while firing away, but even on normal difficulty, there are usually so many enemies shooting you that staying behind or near to cover is advisable. Is there a possible skill issue here? Perhaps, but as someone well acquainted with the pinnacle of movement in the Call of Duty style FPS subgenre thanks to 2016's Titanfall 2, Omni Movement is okay but fails to really impress. What I do love are the way enemies flop around when they die. It seems to be a mix of canned animations which transition into a ragdoll effect, and they are glorious. They don't always look 100% realistic, but the way bodies crash into parts of the environment, tumble on top of others around them and fly backwards is magnificent, and they go a long way towards enhancing Black Ops 6's action movie credentials. There is nothing more satisfying than filling an attacker with lead from short range and watching him collapse due to the force. It adds a marvellous feeling of kineticism to combat I really appreciated. After racing through the airport in record time and boarding Gusev's plane, Case, Adler and Sims realise they've been hoodwinked.
Clear! It's not Gusev's plane. We took the bait. Marshal, we need eyes on Gusev ASAP.
Searching the area now.
Tanks are almost here.
Found them outside Terminal 3. They're taking them to a military cargo plane.
But if Case can steal a tank, maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance to prevent his escape. Given that rampaging through the airport in a tank is equal parts chaotic and beautiful, now is a good time I think to discuss the game's graphics. They're pretty. The only facet of them which really caught my eye were important characters' facial animations, which I spoke of earlier, and they are very well handled. Everything else is about what you'd expect, although that being said, what you'd expect from the series is a high bar. It's why I reckon Call of Duty's graphics don't tend to get mentioned too much these days, even in reviews. There's clearly a hugely talented group of people working on the game, and thus the results are always stunning. There are a few things here and there I'd like to see improved or added. Black Ops 6 has no ray tracing, a feature which adds a lot of depth to dark areas, and texture work here and there is only okay, but beyond those, graphically it's a very tidy product all round. Would I say it has much of a visual identity to match its production values? No. However, I think the series' visual language has always been less about creating a certain aesthetic and more about using extravagant locations and the like to cultivate a certain atmosphere. Not to harp on about James Bond further, but if the different sets used throughout were transplanted into one of his films, they wouldn't look out of place. They're a great match for the espionage-tinged atmosphere Raven fosters. With the airport reduced to little more than smouldering ruins and Gusev's plane out of action thanks to a well-placed shot from your tank, Case, Adler and Sims catch up with Gusev. The scientist reveals he's been working to make the Cradle infectious and people's reaction to it more violent, but says he doesn't have a clue where Pantheon plans to use it. He does know where it's being produced though.
I don't know the target, but I can tell you where the weapon is. Keep talking. Vorkuta. Former Russian prison camp. It became a bioweapon lab years ago, before it was shut down. But it still has what they need to scale up production of the Cradle.
And it's now time to move swiftly on to Under the Radar and a return to the home of the Black Ops series' second ever level, Vorkuta. Before we get into the events of Under the Radar itself, a brief reminder of the area's history. After Alex Mason, the hero of the first game, is captured by the Soviets during a failed mission to assassinate Fidel Castro, he finds himself imprisoned in a forced labour camp named Vorkuta. Mason and fellow inmate Reznov spark an uprising, steal a guard's keys and take a lift to the surface, where they fight through the yard, take down a helicopter and then escape using motorcycles.
We do not have much time. Within this shrine, to the hypocritical decadence of Vorkuta's leaders, lays the key to step 8.
Freedom.
We've definitely seen a chase sequence like that before somewhere recently too, have we not? It's all blooming tremendous, and it remains to this day one of Call of Duty's greatest highlights. Is any of that particularly relevant to the story at hand? As we'll get to shortly, not really, but revisiting the prison is yet another lovely moment in a game chock full of them. In the present, Vorkuta is heavily guarded, which isn't a staggering revelation considering the cargo held within, which means a team effort will be required to snatch the Cradle away from Pantheon. You begin in Sev's shoes as you eliminate a lone guard and steal his uniform, which allows you to stroll around freely. There are 3 things which need to be sabotaged before a full-scale assault on the complex can begin: a radar to the west, a helicopter to the east, and a SAM site to the north. You can take them on in any order you see fit, and there are several ways of dealing with each. The less inventive way of going about things is to just trot up to them and plant explosives somewhere. On the plus side, it's quick and easy and requires next to no thought. On the downside, the C4 takes time to place and you'll be out in the open while doing so, which means there's oodles of time for guards to spot you. Adopting a less ordinary approach makes for a much more engaging 10 minutes or so. The second way of destroying the radar actually isn't much more exciting in fairness. You pick a lock and then you plant explosives on its power supply as opposed to on the dish itself. The third is better. Speaking to this gentleman, you can use your keen eye ability to gather information from various sources in the immediate vicinity. It's a clever mechanic, although Sev's comments make everything too obvious.
Looks like they recently ran a clutter simulation. Whatever that is. The radar must go offline when the simulation's running.
I'd have preferred if we were shown the points of interest more clearly and had to draw our own conclusions. You can then use what you've seen to steer conversation with the guard in the right direction, convincing him to run a clutter test a second time, which will disable the radar for the foreseeable future. You can also put that same talent Sev has for spotting the smaller details to good use at the SAM site. Nattering to this chap, you can persuade him that the guidance chips in the missiles need to be replaced as soon as possible.
Well, if you're so in the know, what's the upgrade? Okay, I guess I can look into it this afternoon.
When that's done, all that's left to do is grab some wire cutters and make a few unwanted modifications to the warheads, ready for the botched tech to be loaded onto the launcher. You can utilise Kenai for a third time for the helicopter too, talking this guard into letting the vehicle's cargo be loaded right away.
Yeah, Angela and Christine. Of course I wasn't built to be a father, and here I am. But enough about me. I should help you with that cargo you mentioned.
Cargo that you have already planted an explosive on. Or, if you've really got your wits about you, you can grab an authorization form and skip the need for Sev's smooth talking entirely. Oh, and if you choose incorrectly when talking to this guard or any of the others, you'll lose the opportunity and will have to follow another path. If you don't fancy getting friendly with the enemy for a third time, the easiest option is to pour water into the nearby refueling truck, thereby ensuring that this particular bird won't be taking to the sky anytime soon. I also have some tremendous news for those of you who have been unimpressed with Raven taking away the choice to shoot everything, as we've seen in other scenarios like this one. In Vorkuta, you can absolutely do that. There's a lot of enemies to contend with and you might end up surrounded, but I can confirm that taking an angrier approach to problem solving is entirely possible. Ammo, weapons and armour are strewn all over the base as well, so I would recommend spending a few minutes getting geared up if that's what you fancy doing. All in all, it's a great section, which again isn't anything earth-shatteringly brilliant, but is very entertaining by Call of Duty standards, and it's a nice way to round out the trilogy of open areas at the beginning of levels. There's lots of different choices, every area housing an objective has multiple routes in and out of it, and stealth is built better into it than say during Most Wanted, where it features briefly under very specific circumstances. Them not being in the right order does bug me a bit though. High Rollers is the simplest with basically nothing going on, and so logically should have appeared first. Most Wanted gives you choices with some danger attached, and so it coming after the casino heist would make the most sense. Under the Radar has the most complexity, rounding out the trio with 3 objectives and multiple solutions in an open area, and so it being the last is spot on. I well and truly believe that ramping up what's asked of you over time by adding layers of additional intricacy is the best way to handle repeat segments like these ones, and unfortunately Raven doesn't quite get the ordering right, with High Rollers sandwiched in between its 2 peers which offer so much more. As a result, Casino Lutazi stands out for all the wrong reasons due to its lifelessness and lack of substance. Before moving on, I also want to quickly whinge about how Raven uses the setting. Exploring parts of Vorkuta you first experienced way back when is great, but I wish there had been a few more callbacks to what unfolded in the prison nearly 30 years prior. Perhaps there could have been some notes lying around for you to find which explained why it was chosen or how it's connected to Pantheon. As it stands, Vorkuta's inclusion is arbitrary, and unless I've missed something, there doesn't seem to be any explanation as to why the paramilitary group chose to develop the Cradle there. It's enjoyable to revisit, but there's no connection to Black Ops 6's story, which is a shame. Once the radar, SAM site and helicopter are all sufficiently broken, Sev accesses the site's security system and finds out that the Cradle has already been moved to another location.
Yesterday morning, Commander. There's really not enough time to completely...
Time?
Yes. The risk of contempt...
I will determine the risks.
Commander, if...
Is that... We've done what we came here to do. The weapon has shipped. Now we evacuate before the CIA or the Soviets learn we're here. Clear enough?
Yes, ma'am.
With the focus then switching to Marshall and Case for some more chopper gunner action. Flying over Vorkuta and getting a better look at the prison you first explored all the way back in 2010 is awesome, with it providing a form of catharsis following your escape in the original Black Ops. Back then you were under fire from above as a helicopter zoned in on you, whereas in Under the Radar you are the predator patrolling the sky. This section is also one of several that to me indicates that Raven struggled to come up with new ideas during the second half of the campaign especially. Early on we get some solid stealth in Blood Feud, an amazingly paced mix of gameplay styles during Most Wanted, the best take on the open combat concept so far with Hunting Season, a traditional Call of Duty mission with a twist in the Cradle, and finally Emergence, a level which is very hit and miss but definitely brings the strange. There's so much going on, so many different changes in pace and mechanics that it's hard not to get swept up in things, even if some parts are stronger than others. The speed at which Raven switches things up is relentless, and for someone like me especially, who has a practically non-existent attention span, it's completely and utterly engrossing. But then, after Emergence concludes, things die down somewhat. The campaign definitely doesn't grind to a halt by any means, but you'll likely notice more and more repetition creeping in. High Rollers, for example, is a cracking mission, but as I alluded to earlier, structurally it is extremely similar to Most Wanted. Ground Control is a very straightforward shootout from beginning to end, although taking control of the tank adds variety. Under the Radar's freeform first half is the best of its kind in Black Ops 6, but it's not exactly new by this stage. You've already done plenty of chopper gunning too, and its last few minutes are spent engaged in straightforward combat. The two endmost levels, which you alternate rapidly between rather than them playing out one by one, are okay-ish, and they're definitely nothing to write home about. Separation Anxiety is the more interesting of the two, with some intriguing imagery and creative set pieces, but it also brings back zombies for even flimsier reasons than when they first appeared, while Checkpoint is mostly made up of unremarkable wave-based combat. To say that Raven fumbles the campaign during its latter half would be unfair. What's included remains engaging, and the developer maintains the game's fast pace through to the end. At the same time, because of the repetition, Black Ops 6 falls ever so slightly short of being able to stake a claim as the series' greatest campaign. I'd say Call of Duty and Call of Duty 2, the original Modern Warfare and Black Ops 2 are all a level above, but beyond those, I can't think of any I've enjoyed as much, and with there being so many games in the franchise, that's glowing praise. Eventually, amidst the mayhem, Case reaches Harrow, and although he doesn't manage to bring her in himself, Seven Marshall arrive to save the day.
We both betrayed our masters, haven't
we? Easy, easy!
Take me, kill me, Troy. There's nothing you can do to stop this.
You know I hate being told what I can't do.
And for the final time, we journey back to the Rook. While capturing Harrow was undoubtedly a successful end to your Vorkuta visit, a tracking device discovered in her arm means it won't be long before Pantheon shows up. Adler believes he at least has a way of making Harrow talk in the meantime, and so while he prepares whatever he's got planned, everyone else sets to fortifying the house. Woods also gives you some advice.
If you got any unfinished business around here, now's the time to take care of it. Once we get started on Harrow, we're in it for the long haul.
Top marks to Raven for including that warning. It still beggars belief how badly some developers handle telling you a point of no return has been reached, but this one is obvious. Assuming you've spent all the money you've earned on upgrades and have completed the entirety of the Rook's chain of puzzles, there's not much left to do other than to have one or two conversations with the team. Having shared my final thoughts during our last visit to the Rook as well, I also don't have anything further to add. When you're ready to begin the endgame, all you need to do is head over to the notice board to begin Separation Anxiety and Checkmate. Okay, so here we are, the climax, the big finale. I don't really like much of it. It begins with Adler injecting Harrow with a truth serum in the hope that doing so will force her to reveal Pantheon's master plan.
Oh, you don't even know if you can do it. We've both made our choices, Troy. I stand by mine, do you?
I miss the old you.
Ah!
Let's see if she's still in there.
A strategy which, by the by, is a favourite of Adler's. Remember, in Cold War he did the same, injecting drugs directly into Bell's brain via his eye socket, the poor beggar. From now on, the story jumps between the two levels, Separation Anxiety and Checkmate, at regular intervals. It begins with the first third of Separation Anxiety, then jumps to part 1 of Checkmate, then back to Separation Anxiety, and so on and so forth. The former gives us a better understanding of Harrow's backstory and her motivations through various segments split across a dreamscape, while the latter closes out events in the real world as Pantheon launches an all-out assault on the Rook. It's an irritating, jarring structure that I don't think works well at all, but in the interest of following the campaign as closely as possible, we will do the same. Separation Anxiety kicks things off. These early stages revolve around Harrow working through events surrounding the murder of her parents, who worked for the CIA when she was a child. You play as Nice Harrow, that is the version of her under the influence of the serum, while Nasty Harrow, the traitor who wants to bring down the CIA, tries to intervene.
Someone that knows is inside. Don't you fucking dare. You don't need to tell them anything. I need to know. Keep your mouth shut.
Think of it as the drug giving her a dual personality of sorts. Because Nasty Harrow breaks the mirror, you apparently need to piece it back together by gathering 3 shards, and you're then transported to Vorkuta for whatever odd reason to get busy sorting that out. There are a trio of riddles to solve which each give you a number for the lock to a box in the middle of the area, and when you've collected them all and opened it, your reward is a single shard. After briefly witnessing more of what happened to Harrow's parents, you're then whisked back to Advanced Technologies and Applications. There you fend off lots of copies of yourself who are basically reskinned zombies while working to power up 4 generators. You then get another quick look at what happened in the household after Harrow's mother was dispatched as her father is gunned down by an unknown assailant.
Wait. Wait!
With the action then swapping over to Checkmate. Everything up to this point is awful, it's just awful. Something I've not really mentioned too much as of yet is Raven's fondness for lists. I've already briefly highlighted how much busy work featured in Hunting Season earlier, but it's present everywhere. The 3 targets in Most Wanted, the 4 keycards in Emergence, the 3 junction boxes in High Rollers, the 3 objectives in Ground Control and the like. There is a lot of time spent doing the same thing again and again, although in Black Ops 6's defence, it's not too noticeable, what with it being spread across a campaign packed with variety. Unfortunately, during separation anxiety, it's incredibly obvious. In quick succession, there's 3 shards, 3 riddles and 4 generators, and because they're all side by side and occur across areas you've already visited, it feels like the worst kind of padding. Across the 15 to 20 minutes or so it takes to finish, you are barely ever engaged mechanically. There is the odd shootout while in the lab, but the vast majority of your time is spent walking from place to place or watching cinematics. If a less experimental Call of Duty level did what separation anxiety does across its first third, almost nothing, it would rightly be criticised, and so Raven shouldn't be given a free pass either. In fact, what unfolds here is even worse, as this is meant to be the game's climax, the crescendo which brings things home with a bang. Instead, you walk around in the snow and then you walk around in the dark, wondering the whole time what the hell happened. Back at the Rook, Checkmate opens with Pantheon arriving en masse. Since Woods isn't fighting fit, he stays behind to continue working on Harrow, while Case, Adler, Sev and Newman gear up and head outside to fend them off.
Listen up. We need to buy Woods time, as much as we can. If we can't get answers out of Harrow, then all this, everything we've been doing, is for nothing. Don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm not here to die a forgotten footnote in history. So lock and load. Let's give our guests the welcome they deserve.
If you expected a nice long firefight, a spoonful of violence to help the previous mediocrity go down, you're going to be disappointed. 5 minutes. You sit outside the house for 5 minutes total as groups of enemies of increasing size and strength charge directly at you. You've access to all the equipment you could possibly need, and plenty of weapons too, but with your job being to defend a position, the whole thing is little more than an elaborate shooting gallery. Because it's so straightforward and is over in the blink of an eye, it destroys any sense of pacing the 2 interwoven missions may have otherwise had. You spend 15 or more boring minutes with Harrow, then only 5 doing actual Call of Duty stuff, and now as Woods reports over the radio that the rogue operative is beginning to talk again, we return to her story for another 15 minutes. It's a ridiculously disjointed affair. With Harrow feeling chattier, we return to separation anxiety and her side of the story. Credit where it's due, this second segment is generally much more engaging from a gameplay perspective than its walking simulator predecessor. There's still a couple of strolls through Langley's corridors, once where it looks normal and another during which it becomes a decidedly threatening environment, but there's more asked of you elsewhere. This platforming section you have to repeat several times to clear a path is interesting enough, and like earlier with the mechanical heart, I couldn't help but think of Dishonored and Corvo's trips to the void. And surprise surprise, there's more zombies, endless hordes of the undead who sprint straight at you while you back away and do your best to thin their ranks. I do not understand Raven's obsession with constantly shoehorning them into the back half of Black Ops 6. They didn't work during Emergence, and they don't work here. Again, they're padding, a reskinned enemy added in huge quantities to help extend the runtime of a level which didn't need it. It's contrived, and it's not fun. There's also a disastrous amount of exposition dished out. We learn that after her parents' deaths, Harrow joined the CIA and began investigating what happened to them. She didn't find anything, and all but gave up hope until one day a floppy disk was slid under her door. According to the files on it, the CIA ordered the hit, and Adler was the man responsible for carrying it out.
The Pantheon. They had copies of my parents' records, entire histories, details of the operation that killed them. It was ordered by the CIA itself.
Sit rep.
Targets eliminated.
Anything else?
Negative. We're done here.
It was disclosure enough to prompt Harrow to join Pantheon and begin working to take control of the CIA from the inside. Pantheon hopes to sow distrust in the CIA by orchestrating a false flag attack using a biological weapon, the Cradle, leaving it in a weakened state and ripe for takeover. Except it may well be that Pantheon were lying about Adler, and maybe even the CIA being responsible.
You were a kid. Can you really trust your own memories?
Targets eliminated.
It was.
How can you be so sure?
Targets eliminated.
If this gigantic exposition dump happened halfway through the campaign, that would be one thing. It wouldn't be brilliant, but there would be some time for Raven to elaborate on it all, and for you to digest it. But adding so many more unanswered questions to the mix with less than 30 minutes till the end credits roll is mental. Midway through this video, I outlined a bunch of different threads that don't get resolved, and now we have a whole new bunch to ponder too. Why were Harrow's parents murdered? Who actually carried it out? Did the CIA really order it? Were Pantheon telling the truth in any capacity? And plenty more besides. Raven had already bitten off more than they could chew long ago, and at this point everything is a complete mess. Rather than attempting to tie up the many existing loose ends, a veritable all-you-can-eat buffet of new loose ends is presented to you. What was actually needed was a delicious bowl of satisfying conclusions for pudding, but unfortunately Raven's dessert station seemingly ran dry. After the monotonous battle with lots of not zombies, Harrow manages to repair the mirror once and for all, and we then return to Bulgaria to continue Checkmate. I've honestly not got much to say about this part of the level. Instead of defending the front of the house, you defend the back of the house as more waves of enemies converge on your location. You do get a mortar you can use to scorch large chunks of the area, which is definitely needed as more annoying armoured enemies continue their advance. Then, you go back to the front of the house and do the same, pushing forward to a bridge and covering Newman as he plants charges on an armoured vehicle. It's very rare I find something so intensely average that I struggle to find anything of note to talk about, but Checkmate is precisely that. The only aspect of it which jumps out is the music playing, that in the background now, which is just as brilliant as the rest of the soundtrack. Destroying the armoured vehicle is a small win for the team, but it may not be enough. The last section of separation anxiety follows. This one is a short but sweet set piece to round things out as you fight through a building before boarding a helicopter. It begs the question as to whether the mission would have functioned better as a whole, as opposed to the split and stretched out version we've been given. Going from the puzzling to the jumping and shooting to the big set piece is a logical progression and would work well enough. You'd just need to cut down on the length of the first two significantly, so the total runtime was around 20 minutes or so. As it stands, it's all disorganised, overly long and confusing, with the breaks between parts only adding to that. We do at least find out what Pantheon is planning.
I see it now. The Cradle is in Washington, D.C., the Capitol building. They're just waiting on my word to release it.
Jesus Christ. That's 5,000 miles from here.
It's awful. Everyone within blocks of the Capitol will be infected.
Why?
Because Livingston's head will roll for an intelligence failure of this magnitude. Failure to stop an attack on our capital. An attack using a CIA-funded bioweapon, no less. And someone else will take his place.
You.
Me. The Pantheon will finally control the institution that cast them out.
And and with such destruction not long away, it's imperative that Case and company succeed at the Rook. However, it's not looking good. Pantheon soldiers enter the house, free their boss and surround Woods before Harrow leaves him with a parting gift as she prepares to be extracted. Only Case can save the day as he races to catch up with her while being egged on by the voice in his head, the identity of whom remains a mystery. Boarding Harrow's helicopter just as it takes off, the two face off against each other with the pilot shot in the process. Crashing in a river, the two continue their struggle with Case using the power of the Cradle to vanquish his foe.
Finish this. We have to get out of this.
And in the true spirit of the game giving us almost no resolutions to anything, the pair's fate is left unknown. The game concludes with Livingston talking to Marshall and Woods about setting up a secret team to get rid of Pantheon for good. While that's going on, a few last words about Black Ops 6. I think it's a really entertaining game. Its first half, or even its first 2/3, is packed full of variety and intrigue, with you never being given a second to catch your breath before something new and exciting is introduced. Level design is often superb, there are some thrilling set pieces, and the soundtrack is one of the best in the series, containing excellent track after excellent track. If Raven Software had somehow managed to maintain the level of quality present up until the campaign's 8th mission or so until its very end, Black Ops 6 would have perhaps been able to make a strong claim to being the best Call of Duty ever. Sadly though, it does tail off the further it goes, in part due to repetition beginning to creep in, and also because of a wonky final level, or levels, which are two of the worst in the game. The biggest issue though is the inconclusive storytelling littered throughout. There are so many more questions offered up than answers, and Raven definitely tries to do way too much during the limited time available to them. And to really drive home my point, I'm going to bid you farewell and let the game's cliffhanger play out. It's one featuring a character who appears at the start for about 30 seconds in the background and only otherwise appears in the game's multiplayer.
You think you're still a threat?
I do. And worse. Whatever cabal brought Harrow into the Pantheon still lives inside our house. We thought they were long gone. But it turns out they never left.
Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and operatives. If you had an explosively good time, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing your thoughts regarding Black Ops 6, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.